Welcome into the quick crash course on the bishop's opening, which is simple for you to learn, but really hard for your opponents to deal with. It arises from you bringing your bishop out right on the second move, which gets your opponent out of their opening prep. They usually expect you to develop your knight instead, which leads to all classical theory. But by developing your bishop, you're aiming this potentially vulnerable square, and there are a lot of traps along the way for your opponent to watch over for. So usually they're going to develop this knight and hit your central pawn, but then you come up with one more surprise. You play d4, counterattacking their central pawn and putting things on fire. Again, for an unprepared opponent, it's really hard to deal with that. They'll usually capture either this pawn or the other one on d4, and finally they may even try to defend their own pawn by bringing this knight out. We'll talk about all these options and all the questions that you guys have sent me about the bishop's opening. Let's start with this natural capture where they simply adhere to their original plan. They brought the knight out, attacked their pawn, and since you haven't defended it, they can go ahead and capture it. Now after this pawn takes on e5, they're on a really shaky ground, and a little inaccuracy can lead to immediate disaster. Such as if they try to bring this knight out, that already your bishop's opening plays out with this beautiful bishop sack, which is very common for this opening in general, and after the king moves, you then bring your queen out, and on the next turn, you're going to get your piece back with returns. Now you totally expose their king and can't castle anymore, and you grab the pawn along the way. Quite a lot of your opponents at this point will start thinking for some time, and that will say, hold my mouse, and are going to go pawn d5. Now, for a moment, they're quite proud of themselves because they found a way to solidify this knight and also to hit your bishop all at the same time. But what they don't know is that after bishop takes d5, they actually are on a sure path to Blunderville, because not only they blundered one pawn already, because your bishop is actually defended, they cannot capture it. Now they also need to do something about this knight on e4, which has been attacked. And if they move it away, there is another beautiful combo. Still bishop takes f7, but this time with a different purpose. Want to distract the king and grab his queen on d8. If black tries to hold on to this defense, it doesn't really help because after bishop to g5, we still get what we want. The most played move by black in this position is a very tempting mistake, bishop c5, with this double attack to your pawn on f2. But you counter that double attack with your triple counter attack, and you totally overpower your opponent. Now, the main threat you've got is queen takes f7 checkmate in 1, but also their knight on e4 is attacked, and it can go away because in that case their bishop on c5 will be taken. Sure enough, they can play this in-between check, bishop takes f2, but after king goes away, they're left with the same problems. Mainly, they need to counter this checkmating threat, and as they do so, you then happily grab their knight, and now their bishop is also hanging. As they do anything about that, the main problem of black is not only they're down a piece at this point, but you actually keep attacking. It's very easy for you to just keep moving forward, whether to bring the bishop out or to bring the knight out, threatening this pawn, maybe to bring the bishop right here. You have more space and it's far easier for you to maneuver. For whatever reason, the most played move by black here is pawn c6. I guess they're preparing for this move, but it doesn't change the situation overall. You can still play bishop d3, and that's the beginning of one of the most favorite variations of mine personally in the whole bishop's opening. You're threatening checkmate, they gotta do something about that. Now you play bishop g5. Threatening queen, the queen needs to move, but then you play bishop to f6, getting ready to checkmate them within a couple moves just by rerouting your queen to this g7 square. They go d5 according to their plan, but it doesn't really change anything. Once again, just play queen h4, still threatening mate, and as they try to shut down this opportunity, you unleash your inner Mikhail Tal, leave no pawns unturned, and grab this pawn on h5. Now, it's really fascinating stuff, because after knight to g5, they're up a queen. It is their turn. They know clearly what your threat is, but they're absolutely defenseless. Alright, so far we talked about them capturing one of your central pawns. In a moment, we'll talk about the other pawn capture, which is actually the most common, but I know that many of you guys sent me in comments saying that my opponents play less optimal moves and I don't know how to react. So let's talk about one of those less optimal options. So let's say they're going to go knight to c6, just trying to defend this pawn, because I want you to be fully covered, okay? Now, in this case, certainly there is no point in taking. That would just allow black to centralize their knight, but d5 really shuts down this idea. You just gain more space and also win a tempo, and basically their knight has to go somewhere back. If they try to play knight to d4 being more active, then after pawn to c3, all of a sudden, this playful pony is captured. And here's a quick game that illustrates the attacking potential of the bishop's opening and how you can use this bishop actually for your attack. Now, the game is a little bit more advanced. It was played in Las Vegas National Opening, and the white player is roughly 2200, his opponent is roughly 2100. So we're getting into this where black goes c6, getting ready to grab the center, knight f3, black goes pawn d5. That's how pros often react to bishop's opening. White drops the bishop back. Now black still needs to be careful about this pawn on e5. Black goes bishop b4 check and then retreats back to d6 in order to protect this pawn. And now after knight to c3, notice that with very simple moves, white actually keeps putting pressure on black. And black thought, okay, I'm just gonna trade off this central pawn. He definitely expected white to recapture, but instead, white said, hey, this diagonal is now open, let me make use of it. And he went knight to g5, countering this pawn on f7, and as black castled, only now white recaptures on e4, but now he manages to put together quite many pieces looking towards black kingside in all these different directions, and now it's already getting quite tough for black. Black played bishop e7, trying to solidify and also potentially to x-ray this knight, but after the trade, white just protected the knight with his pawn, and again, it's becoming more and more unpleasant for black. Black played queen e7, I guess trying to overprotect the square, but now queen h5, simply threatening checkmate. Black traded on g5, but now after this exchange, the h-file is now opened. Black needs to defend his king. He goes bishop f5 to protect the pawn this way. Now at castle queenside, and black plays a5, trying to start his own counterattack. And in the actual game, white played a3, and he still won the game later on. But he actually missed a marvelous opportunity to finish the game on the spot, using the power of this light square bishop. It started with the move pawn to g4, and I get it why white didn't play this move in the actual game, because it seems like, sure, if this bishop went away, I would just checkmate black, but black would just go bishop g6, gain a tempo, the queen has to move, now black goes a4, maybe a3 then, and it looks like black is gaining the upper hand. But white could shut it down with this beautiful queen sack. And after black recaptures, notice that they can't recapture with the f-pawn, it's pinned. So they have to take this way, and then white simply stacks rooks along the h-file and delivers a checkmate. And although the plan is clear, it takes a couple moves for white to execute it, but black is totally defenseless, there is nothing they can do against that. And notice that it all happens because this pawn on f7 is pinned by our light square bishop. Because even from a distance, our sniper bishop is actually doing a great job. Without it, black would just play f6 and would escape with his king through this square. But now there's nothing they can do. After whatever move of black, just go here and then rook h8 mate. Back to most common lines on beginner to intermediate level, usually your opponents will simply take this pawn on d4 right here. Now at this point, I do not recommend that you automatically recapture because your opponent can gain a tempo for their development. Therefore, instead of recapturing, you play a trickier move, knight to f3. You still threaten potentially to push this pawn forward, and in general, you're just developing your pieces. Now, if your opponent is seduced by this pawn on e4 and go ahead and takes it, because it looks like just a great move for black to play, to capture a pawn, to play d5 on the next move with a great life. But now you can play queen takes d4. And notice the difference. In this case, they have no time for this move knight to c6 because they have to defend their own knight from e4, which is handy. Now, they'll usually retreat it either back to f6 or to d6. We'll talk about both. Let's start with knight to d6, where they try to hit your bishop and gain a tempo. You can stay cool and simply castle. After knight to c6, it looks like they're both knights are attacking you, and you're gonna need to move either a queen or a bishop or something, but don't judge your rook by its cover. You can go rook e1 check, and that's the beginning of the end for black. They need to cover their king, but now queen takes g7. In this case, there is no bishop on f8 anymore, therefore, this move is now available, and you hit the rook needs to move, and after bishop to h6, finally they are done. Yes, they can grab your bishop, that light square bishop that initiated the bishop's opening, but that makes you so angry that you just checkmate them. Retreating the knight to d6 was indeed a bit awkward, and in most cases your opponents are going to bring the knight back to f6. Now after bishop g5, you keep putting more pressure on black. They'll usually play bishop e7 to neutralize the pin, and then you just develop. Now they can play knight c6 and try to win a tempo attacking your queen, but it actually is not that bad for you, because after queen to h4, you maintain your queen on a very good and active position, putting pressure down these files, and therefore, you haven't really wasted time, you just brought your queen to a more active position. Notice that h6 doesn't do anything because this pawn is pinned, by the way, so you don't have to react at all to this move. If they instead simply castle, then you can do the same. You can castle queenside, which also brings your rook into play and puts some pressure on black. And in general, playing this position becomes really tough for black. I mean, objectively, you're better, but it's also very hard for black to come up with correct defensive moves. Because besides this rook, you're also going to bring the other rook right here. You're already putting pressure across this diagonal, some pressure towards his castling. So again, really hard for black to deal with all that. If they try to get rid of your annoying bishop from g5, then you're going to simply sacrifice on h6 and totally open up their king, and now they are defenseless. Knight g4 fails really nicely. It looks like it's a nice move pushing your queen back, but you're gonna play queen g6 and utilize the power of that light square bishop on c4, which pins the pawn, and you win the game. So that doesn't work. How about them bring the knight right here back on h7? That is a nice defensive move, and they also prepare for this bishop to come over to g5 and potentially to counterattack. But you shut it down really nicely with this very unusual rook lift. Now, rook lift sometimes occurs across the third rank, but it's really rare where you can do that across, the entire board like this. So from here, you do control this square. They can't easily jump there anymore, and after any other move of black, you just complete your rook lift and win the game on the spot. Some of you guys also asked me about this variation. How about black playing knight f6, but after d4 and they capture knight f3, they don't take this pawn at all, but they see that it has potential to go forward and attack the knight, so they just play d6, they try to play safe and stay away from any troubles. Now in this case, I do recommend that you go for this tricky line knight to g5. Now, sure enough, you could have played some other moves and they're perfectly fine, but knight g5 is more ambitious, and in most cases, it wins the game. Now, I know some of you will tell me, if I turn on Stockfish, it tells me that I play like worst fish. Don't worry about that. Your opponents aren't 3600 rated cyborgs. They're going to play d5 to shut down the diagonal, and then they're going to follow up with a very casual blunder, knight takes d5. This is a losing error, but it's really hard to comprehend why, because from human perspective, it's just the most natural move to play. There was a trade of pawns on d5, and black just want to get their pawn back. But now after castles, all of a sudden it turns out that you have simply way too many threats all across all these diagonals with this knight putting pressure, and black is actually defenseless. Queen f3 is coming also to add more fuel to the fire, and then after that it's just total overload of black. Alright, so if they go bishop e7, trying to at least kick this knight out, you know what's coming. You're gonna drop the f-bomb. So you play knight takes f7 with this double attack. They have to accept it, but then queen to h5. There is some similarity to the fried liver attack, where you sack the knight on f7 and then continue this attack. And after any move of black, you basically get your piece back and you keep your attack going for free. Right now it's bishop takes d5, check, and black is totally devastated. The most played move by black, by the way, is king g7, trying to put the king to this seemingly safe spot. After rook f8, it would look quite similar to castles, but in reality, after queen to bishop to h6, this is just a checkmate in 2 moves. Here's one more thing that your opponents may try, is playing bishop c5, just trying to get away with castling. But of course, their life is not going to be that easy. You're simply playing pawn e5, hitting the knight and seizing the initiative. Now, what can they do? This knight needs to move. This square is controlled by your bishop. If it goes forward to e4, this knight is always shaky. It has no way out after that because you already control all these squares around. So it's actually quite a dangerous spot for black. You can always go like bishop d5 and just capture it. In most cases, they're going to move the knight out of danger to g4 because it seems like a more aggressive square. But it's not really, because after h3, once again, this knight is literally running out of squares. This knight is attacked. Going back to h6 is just way too passive. You can take it straight away and disrupt their pawn chain, or you can play bishop g5 again with the tile threats. That's really unpleasant. Sometimes your opponents will notice this tricky idea, knight takes f2. They temporarily sacrifice the knight, well, not temporarily, permanently, but then they hope to play d3 with this discover check. And indeed, it is a discover check. The only downside is that it doesn't really have any follow-up. And you just play king to g3, a very nice move, teasing your opponent a little bit, but in fact your king is getting ready to just hide right here. There's nothing your opponent can do. Now they are probably going to trade these pawns, and you've got one more tactical trick right here, bishop takes f7 coming, if they're careless, and then you grab their bishop on c5. Usually they'll castle, but they'll castle into the other danger. This time it's knight to g5, threatening mate in 1. They gotta play g6, but then you sack the knight on f7. You see that our light square bishop strikes very often across this opening, and once the dust settles, you're up a whole rook, as if you could be up a half of a rook, but anyways, you win. Alright, and here comes the main line of the main line. So let's say they go knight f6, hitting this pawn, you strike in the center with this counter attack. They take and you go knight f3. Now, as we know by now, taking this pawn on e4 is quite optimistic, and after queen takes d4, although computer tells you that the position is approximately equal, in reality it's really hard to defend here as black. White is ahead in development, you keep attacking and creating threats. Alright, so the correct move for black is knight to c6, just developing a knight and keeping it super solid. Then you can castle, also getting ready to play e5 after whatever black does. Let's say they go bishop c5, trying to overprotect this pawn on d4 and getting ready to castle, but you play pawn e5. Now, again, Strictly speaking, black can hold on here, but in reality they'll usually go knight to g4, which is wrong. Now you have different ways to continue your attack. I love the move pawn to c3 for its simplicity. Now you threaten, just taking here this pawn, attacking the bishop, then keep marching forward. So they'll usually take right here on c3, but that enables you to execute one of the main tricks of the bishop's opening. You sacrifice this light square bishop, and after king takes, usually in such positions you follow up with this queen to d5 check to the king and attack the bishop, and that is a good move right here as well. You can win the game this way. But there is also this move knight to g5, which is even trickier, where you check their king, plus you open this discovered attack to their knight. But at this point, once again, you can trick your opponent. It's kind of like that last curse rule: if you see a good move, look for a better one. You've got queen d5 check, which just finishes the game. And if you want to get my complete system for finding such moves on your own and calculating them through, then check out this free masterclass.